All right, hello everybody, and I want to welcome you to my YouTube channel. My name is Cyrus Janssen, and I want to thank you all for tuning in to today's special event. And I'm very honored to have an amazing group of panelists here today and be working with some amazing organizations as we're going to be discussing the latest details in the Meng Wanzhou case. Now, for many of you that follow my YouTube channel on a regular basis, you know that my goal with my channel is to advocate peace and learning to work together and a better relationship between countries like America, Canada, and other Western countries and China. This is really the primary motivation for this YouTube channel. Many of you do know that I'm also based here in Vancouver, Canada. And if you've been following my channel over the last year, you'll have noticed that I've made several videos about Meng Wanzhou. I'm particularly interested in this case because, number one, I'm here in Vancouver. It's quite amazing to have, the two great superpowers in the world, the United States and Canada, United States and China, basically facing off right here in Canada, right here in my backyard in beautiful British Columbia. Now, today, I just want to, basically welcome everybody to the event. We've got some amazing panelists that are going to come in here, and this is really going to be a fun event over the next 2 hours. We're going to have a lot of education, a lot of insights. We're going to have 4 speakers in total. I'm going to be the last speaker, but I'm hosting today, inviting some really great people to come on here and speak on some various issues. And I just want to go over some housekeeping rules as we get started. We welcome comments from everybody. If you have a comment, please send them in. We're going to do our best to answer comments and questions throughout the live stream. We've scheduled 4 different sections in our timeline, to be able to specifically answer these questions. There is one rule that we ask for engagement is to please not use any profanity, or any kind of spamming in your comment section. We have a 1-strike policy on that. If you are, caught doing that, we will ban you from the chat. We're happy to have, constructive dialogues, and that is what we're really all about here. So as we get going in today, I want to bring up, basically, we have 5 sponsors, for this event, or basically organizations who are all working together here in Canada, on this campaign to really have, Meng Wanzhou freed and, hopefully improve the relationship between Canada and China. The first is the Canada-China Council for Cooperation and Development, the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, Canadian Peace Congress, the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War, and the International Action Center. In addition, we also have 3 endorsing organizations, that is Just Peace Advocates, the Mobilization Against War and Occupation, and also the World Beyond War, that is based here in Canada. So these are the presenting sponsors and endorsing, agencies. So next I want to bring in Jonathan Dye. He's going to give a welcome speech, to everybody, and then we're going to go ahead and jump right in and get started on this panel discussion.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and good morning, friends in the Asia Pacific region. I understand it's 7 o'clock in the morning there. Before we proceed to the panel, we'd like to once again to thank all the sponsors and the endorsers for their continuing support. And we'd like to make a special mention of the contribution of a special Canadian who initiated the cross-Canada campaign to free Meng Wanzhou and has been the driving force behind it. And that fine person is Brother Ken Stone. We are also excited to see more and more people, especially young people, joining our campaign and movement to restore Canada to the status of a peace-promoting country which develops its own independent foreign policies. On this occasion, I'm happy to announce the forming of a youth organization, the CCCCD Youth Association. Anti-imperialism is the core tenet of the CCCCD Youth Organization, its operation, and works to fight for a peaceful and cooperative world, which is run in the best interest of working people by working people. Aidan Joner is the president of the CCCCD Youth Association, and he says, xenophobia is rampant in Canada. Anti-Asian hate crimes are on the rise, enabled by a century-long policy of attacking China and the Chinese Canadians. Canada's foreign policy towards China is one designed to stun our nation's growth. While enabling the American-led Cold War on China, we work to oppose these actions unapologetically. Congratulations, the CCCCD Youth Association, and the future of the world belongs to young people like you. Interested persons can follow the CCCCD Youth Association on social media for announcement on future actions and campaigns, and consider setting up an annual donation on their website today. Now, let's come back to the topic of this evening's panel. It is sad that after 2.5 years, we are still here fighting for the freedom of Miss Meng Wanzhou. The arrest of Madame Meng, a cowardly act of kidnapping and hostage-taking, was a colossal blunder on the part of the Trudeau government that has cost Canadians dearly. Now, the Trudeau government chose to follow the diktat of the US government in arresting Meng Wanzhou at expense of Canadians' national interest, should cause us to question whether we have any sovereignty left in this country. I want to point out that China, which boasts the most prosperous economy in the world, has for 42 years hardly engaged in and not engaged in any war, and has been promoting peace, harmony, and economic development around the world. While the USA has, for decades, been engaged in launching numerous destructive wars, leveling economic sanctions against the 59 countries, and causing millions of deaths around the world. Canada is the only G7 country that does not have a shameful history of invading and looting China. And it was Pierre Trudeau, Justin's father, who initiated the good relationship between Canada and China 51 years ago. Pierre Trudeau's independence of a foreign policy ushered in 5 decades of prosperity with China, to the point that China is now Canada's second largest trading partner. In closing, we call upon the Prime Minister and his government to restore our mutually beneficial friendship with China by immediately releasing Ms. Meng. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Fantastic, Jonathan. Thank you so much for being here for today's event, and also giving that really great recap of the great relationship that Canada has enjoyed with China. And this is something that I think all of us are very concerned about, and this is why we have this campaign. This is why we're making YouTube videos. Is we want the relationship between these two great countries. Interesting enough, Pierre Trudeau, he actually opened up a relationship with Canada and China, actually before the United States did. So, Canada's had a great history, with the country of China. The two have benefited tremendously from each other, and this is something that we want to continue to see in the future. Now, everybody, I'm very honored to be, hosting this event on my YouTube channel, but also to be a panelist and be joined by 3 very distinguished speakers here. I think all of you are going to really, really enjoy them. I'd like to bring them all to the screen right now. And, I'm going to give you a brief introduction of all of the panelists here. So our first is actually going to be, Chris Black, and he is a Canadian international criminal lawyer, a writer, an activist with over 40 years of experience, including 20 years, on war crimes cases at international tribunals. He is involved in many campaigns in Canada and internationally for social, economic, and political justice. His novel, Beneath the Clouds, deals with Canada's subservience to the United States and Western political control of the international justice system. I think we're really going to, enjoy hearing Chris's updates. He's going to be updating us on Meng Wanzhou's case. As many of you know, it has been delayed until August And so we're eagerly anticipating the next phase of that and hopefully getting a decision, later this year. So, Chris Black, who is an accomplished lawyer, is going to be updating us on that. Another panelist is Sheila Xiao. She is a researcher, a data scientist, and a community organizer, a second-generation Chinese American who was raised in San Francisco, California, Irvine, and the University of Hong Kong. She is a tireless advocate for communities of color and the co-founder of the organization of Pivot to Peace. Sheila and I actually first met. She sent me an email many months ago, might have actually been about a year ago, as, this tension, was growing. Obviously COVID-19's impacted our world. There's been a tremendous amount of Asian hate crime. She just reached out to me via email, said she was starting this organization. I said, hey, what can I do? And she said, just follow us on Twitter, retweet us, just support us. We're all working towards the same thing, better relationships. So I'm really excited to have Sheila on the panel and to, hear her insights as well. Our fourth panelist is Mei Chiu. And Mei is a member of the Progressive Chinese of Quebec, an organization to fight anti-Chinese racism in Quebec. Mei has fought against South African apartheid, Israeli apartheid, police brutality, and against Bill 21. She has worked as a community organizer for housing rights and against poverty. Professionally, she is a mediator and a family attorney, and she initiated the March Against Asian Hate Crime on March 21st, which inspired marches all across Canada. And this is really, really, really important because, and this is something that we want to add into this discussion today, is really the rise in anti-Asian hate crime. I live in Vancouver, and a Bloomberg article just, published last week highlighted that Vancouver is actually the capital of Asian hate crime in North America. A tremendous amount of, incidences have been reported. This is something that we need to discuss about, and I'm really excited to bring in, Mei for her insights. So these are the four panelists, and then myself, I'm going to be the fourth panelist. I'm going to be closing out the discussion today, but I'm really excited myself to hear from these panelists and their insights. And we're going to start with Chris Black to hear about the legal proceedings and some of the important updates in the Meng Wanzhou case. So, Chris, the stage is yours.
Thanks very much. It's a great honor to be here and to join everybody else in this panel. It's a very important one. And I was assigned to talk about the legal issues and what's involved and why Meng was arrested in the first place. So, I guess I'll start out by saying that we object to the arrest and detention of Meng Wanzhou because it's based on a U.S. extradition request that was made for political reasons. The objective being to use her detention as a bargaining chip in trade negotiations between China and the United States as harassment of and an attempt to discredit Huawei, to prevent it competing with US and EU tech companies, and as an attempt to enforce the illegal economic embargo or economic warfare being conducted by the United States against Iran. It was meant to send a message and is a warning to others. Now, President Trump made it clear in a statement days after her arrest that he would certainly intervene in the case if it led to a better outcome for the U.S. in trade negotiations. Her lawyers rightly called this abhorrent, for it proves that Meng is in fact held hostage to force China to bend to its will. The fact that Prime Minister Trudeau was made aware of the American request days before her arrest, confirming John Bolton's statement to the same effect, also establishes that the matter was discussed at a high political level before the request was sent to Canada. Further, her arrest took place during a period of increasingly hostile and aggressive propaganda and actions against China by the United States, Canada, the EU, Australia, and Britain, the former colonial powers except for Canada. Although you can view Canada as a colonial power with respect to its own indigenous peoples. It has also to be seen in light of the illegal arrests of citizens of other nations the US has targeted as enemies, while no such arrests have taken place of employees of European, Canadian, or other companies doing business with Iran. So Meng's case can also be seen as a case of selective prosecution, which is a defense available to Meng, since if it is established, the courts can stay the charges, and as it is considered unjust to charge some but not others. For instance, we can cite the cases of Alex Saab, a Colombia-born Venezuelan businessman who was appointed as special envoy by the Republic of Venezuela, who was en route to Iran to buy medical supplies for the people of Venezuela, when on June 12, 2020, he was detained in Cape Verde in Africa, thrown in jail, held in solitary confinement, psychologically tortured, and then finally got bail and released, although the courts in Cape Verde ordered his extradition to the United States. Fortunately for him, the African Bar Association and the Economic Community of West African countries objected, and that has been stopped so far. We can also cite the case of Moon Chol-myung, a North Korean businessman who was also extradited from Myanmar to the United States in March of this year, on similar charges that he was helping North Korea, and all he was doing was helping North Korea obtain necessary supplies. Now, the connection between these cases for the Americans is that in these transactions, the SWIFT bank clearing system was used to transfer funds. And in fact, this is the only claim to jurisdiction that the Americans attempt to make. Now, I shall deal with this a bit later. There have also been several Russians detained by the Americans under similar claims. We haven't got time to go into all those. So we see a pattern of illegal actions by the Americans against nations in which they use people as pawns to affect their hostile foreign policy. It's also indicated by the fact that the United States chose to target an employee of a company instead of the company itself, which it usually does in these cases, since the employees are acting under the company instructions, and it's the company, the corporate entity, which is responsible for the actions of its employees. Now, I've been asked to tell people, explain what extradition is. What is it? Extradition is simply the legal process by which one state seeks to have a person who committed a crime in that state or was convicted of a crime in that state returned to that state from another state in which they are now located. This also takes place between provinces in Canada or states within the United States when someone has committed a crime in one jurisdiction but is located in another jurisdiction. Since all nations are sovereign, although the Americans try to deny that, such requests are made possible by treaties between various nations. And Meng's case is controlled by the extradition treaty between Canada and the United States. The extradition hearing is not a trial. The requesting state, here the American state, is only required to prove that it has a prima facie case against a person. That is, a case that, if not answered, could result in a conviction at trial. However, the arguments put forward by her legal team with respect to the substance of the charges about prosecutorial misconduct by the Americans, deceiving the Canadian court on the facts alleged, and what the real facts are all meant to establish that the U.S. does not have a prima facie case and that the allegations are political in nature. So that requires us to look at the extradition treaty, and the controlling paragraph of that is Article 4, subparagraph C, which says, extradition shall not be granted in any of the following circumstances. Quote, when the offense in respect of which extradition is requested is of a political character, or the person whose extradition is requested proves that the extradition request has been made for the purpose of trying or punishing him or her for an offense of the above-mentioned character. It is important to note that the article makes it an obligation on the requested state, which is Canada in this case, to refuse a politically motivated request. The requested state does not have any discretion in the matter. It must refuse the request in such circumstances. Article 9 is also important because it states that the request for extradition shall be made through diplomatic channels. This is important, an important factor, because the request is sent by the U.S. State Department to the Canadian Foreign Ministry. Therefore, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of Justice would have received copies of the request and had the right at that time to refuse the request, knowing as we do, and as they certainly did, that the request had no legitimate basis and was politically motivated. By refusing to reject the request at that point, and instead sending the file to the local federal crown prosecutor in British Columbia to be dealt with by the courts, the federal government arguably violated both the treaty and Meng's right of protection under Article 4 of the treaty. Indeed, the federal government can step in at any time under Article 4 to reject the request and free Meng. They can do it today. They can do it tonight. They can do so even if the judge in this case orders her extradition. I had a case once, 30 years ago now, of a man accused of 2 murders in the United States who faced a gas chamber. The Americans succeeded in the extradition hearing, and he was ordered extradited by the court. But I was able to arrange a meeting in Ottawa with the then Minister of Justice, Mr. Bouchard at that time, and was successful in getting him to agree not to send the man to the United States unless they agreed not to seek the death penalty. And this fact was also stated in the famous letter of June 3rd, 2020, requesting Meng's immediate release in order to soothe tensions between Canada and China, which was signed by a number of notable lawyers and former ministers, including the former Minister of Justice, Alan Rock, former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Axworthy, the former Supreme Court judge and former professor of mine, Louise Arbour, the very learned Toronto appeal lawyer, Brian Greenspan, and several other former ministers, law professors, advisors to Prime Minister Trudeau, and high UN officials such as Louise Frechette, who was at one time Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. Though it's of interest that the letter signed by those people only wanted the release of Meng in order to obtain the release of the 2 Canadian Michaels, the Canadians arrested in China, so that Canada could have a more hostile policy against China. But we'll leave that for others to comment on. Now, Meng's defense team has presented these arguments to the court and the government, but they've also challenged the entire basis of the U.S. indictment against Meng. For the indictment contains several counts, most of which refer to the violations of the U.S. sanctions against Iran. But several counts are couched in terms of fraud, but they're still relating to violations of the Iran sanctions, so-called. Now, the U.S. had to do this because Article 10 and Article 2 of the treaty also stipulate that the offense that they charge Meng with must also be an offense in Canada and provable in law as such an offense. In other words, no one can be extradited to the U.S. from Canada unless the crime they are accused of is also a crime in Canada. Okay, fraud is a crime shared by both countries and is listed in the treaty. But where is the fraud in this case? This question requires us to look at several factors, as the Meng defense has done. First of all, the U.S. indictment against Meng and Huawei and Skycom, a subsidiary of Huawei, of trying to violate the illegal U.S. sanctions against Iran seems to be the principal charge. Canada has no such sanctions imposed against Iran at this point. That's the real essence of the matter. When one reads the U.S. indictment, it is clear the main thrust of the crimes alleged is ignoring the illegal U.S. sanctions against Iran, of trying to bypass those illegal sanctions, of ignoring the emergency powers given to the United States president under which the sanctions, so-called, were issued. The Canadian prosecutor and U.S. authorities tried to mask the fact that the central elements of the indictment concern the Iranian sanctions, and they do so by claiming that Ms. Meng misinformed a bank, in this case HSBC, Hong Kong Shanghai Bank Corporation, at a meeting which took place in Hong Kong, China, and did not disclose her company Huawei was going to use funds from the bank to engage in dealings with Iran. It now seems clear from the documents the defense has obtained that Ms. Meng and Huawei were in fact open about that, and HSB was informed of the true nature of the transaction. So that no funds were obtained by false pretenses as alleged. Worse, it is clear that the U.S. authorities tried to mislead the Canadian authorities and the court by disclosing a doctored PowerPoint presentation by Meng to HSBC that had the information she gave to HSBC removed. In most cases in this country and in the common law system, most courts would consider that an attempt to deceive the court and would stay the proceedings at that point, because then the prosecution and the party bringing that forward could not be trusted. And it's an abuse of power, abuse of the court proceedings to do that. The ordinary citizen will then ask, well, what is it to the United States, what happened between a Chinese company and a British bank in a meeting in a Chinese city, and when the bank has not complained to anyone that they were defrauded, when the officials of the bank have not been similarly charged, and no charges have been laid in China, which had jurisdiction over the matter, or in the UK, which arguably maybe had jurisdiction. But the US claims jurisdiction because they argue money which would have been transferred through the SWIFT banking system, which would have flowed funds through their wires for a few milliseconds, and they would travel through wires in the United States. This, they claim, gives them jurisdiction over the matter, and they then claim that HSBC would be subject to heavy losses due to the immense fines the Americans could impose on them for violating its illegal sanctions against Iran. In other words, their claim to jurisdiction is ephemeral at best and arguably non-existent. There has to be a substantial connection between the state laying the charge and the criminal activity alleged. They cannot make such an argument in this case. The constant attempt, in fact, by the Americans to impose American law on the world and to claim that it has worldwide jurisdiction fails in this case, as it must do in all cases. Otherwise, the United States would be master of the world, and the sovereignty of other nations and the protection they afford to their citizens would completely vanish. Now, what losses would HSBC have arguably incurred? According to the Americans, they would have been hit by heavy fines, but HSBC can argue that they would not have suffered any losses at all. If HSBC were subject to charges by the United States, they would simply argue that there is no case to answer because the American sanctions are illegal and therefore void, and no court could make them pay an illegal fine. They did not and could not, in law, suffer any legal consequences. The fact is, though, the Americans would de facto try and do something. But this leads us to consider what the so-called sanctions are and why they are legal and why they use the word sanctions. Sanction implies that the country imposing them has some sort of superior right, some sort of superior moral position over the nation they're imposing them, some sort of higher authority over a nation they're imposing them on. And obviously, each nation is sovereign. The United States has no such higher position, nor does Canada or any other nation. And the United States authorities are subject to American law. So we have to remember that Article 6 of the United States Constitution states, in part, that this Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made, or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land. Now, the U.S. signed and ratified the UN Charter, and it is therefore part of the United States domestic law and cannot be overridden. The UN Charter reserves the right to impose sanctions or economic embargoes against a sovereign nation to the Security Council. No single state or group of states, no matter what they argue, had the right to abrogate to themselves the right given solely to the Security Council on Chapter 7 of the UN Charter and Article 41 dealing with the ability of the Security Council to impose economic embargoes against a nation. Therefore, the sanctions the U.S. claims to have imposed are void under U.S. law. They do not legally exist. In fact, the Canadian government, by cooperating in pressing this American claim against Meng and Huawei, undermines its own sovereignty and protection of its own citizens. For if the U.S. false legal claims are accepted, then the United States could demand the extradition from Canada of any Canadian business person who engages in similar transactions with Iran, when in Canada they could not be charged at all. The U.S. is adept at concocting fraud charges, and what would Canada's answer be then? Further, Canada, by cooperating with the U.S. in this case, is directly supporting the illegal U.S. sanctions against Iran, which also adds to the political nature of the case. Lastly, the Meng defense has presented a strong case that Ms. Meng's rights were violated when she was detained at Vancouver Airport on December 1st, 2018. Canadian law requires anyone detained by the authorities to be immediately informed that they are under arrest, the reason for their arrest or detention, their right to a lawyer, and their right to remain silent. She was not informed of her rights. Instead, her rights were continuously violated. She also had a right that her property not be subject to illegal search and seizure. Yet the sequence of events shows that she was held incommunicado for several hours, subjected to aggressive questioning, her mobile phone seized, was browbeaten into giving up her passwords, never told why she was being held, her right to remain silent, to have her property secure, etc. Unfortunately, breach of fundamental rights by the police in this country is all too frequent in many criminal cases, as most criminal lawyers are aware and have experience with. But in this case, these circumstances add to the evidence that her arrest was a political one. Because under the treaty, the Canadian authorities are not supposed to help the requesting state, in this case, the United States, find evidence to support their request for extradition. That's not their role. Their only role is to act on the U.S. arrest warrant and detain her, advise of her rights, and leave it at that and for the courts to proceed. But instead, the RCMP and the CBSA acted as if they were agents of the American police. They may claim they were trying to find evidence of fraud, itself an improper action, but it's much more likely that they wanted to have access to her phone to obtain business information about Huawei. In other words, they were trying to steal information and pass it to the Americans to be used against Huawei and, of course, against Iran and China for political purposes. And now we see for several months the argument about an RCMP officer who was involved in her arrest and who could testify about all those circumstances, refusing to come to testify and being protected by the government and so on. So in the end, it's clear that Ms. Meng's detention and arrest and the extradition request are politically motivated. And therefore, under the treaty, the government of Canada can and must release her. It's also clear that the accusations themselves, the cover of her being held hostage by the Americans and Canadians, has no basis either in fact or law, and on those grounds, the U.S. request must be rejected. So it's for all these reasons that we as citizens of Canada demand her release, because aside from the very serious economic and other consequences for Canada that have resulted and will result from her continued detention, it's the right thing to do. Thank you. Those are my remarks, subject to any questions by people.
Yes, absolutely. All right, wonderful. And I've got a little bit of feedback here. All right, can everybody hear me? Okay, there we go. Yes, Chris, thank you so much for giving us the analysis of this case. There's really, it's quite amazing because this is such a complicated case. There's so many things to really understand. And, you gave a very good job in a very short amount of time. I've got a few questions from, the panel, from the audience here that I'd like to ask. Somebody had asked, what about Justin Trudeau's government? Could he have done more? Is this really on him? I mean, can in your opinion, could he have done more?
Yeah, they could have rejected the request as soon as it came across their desk. In fact, Trudeau states that he discussed the matter before the request was formally sent through with senior American officials, and he could have told them at that time, "I don't bother sending it. We'll reject it," as other nations did, and warned Meng of the fact that the Americans were out pursuing her. Canada could have done the same thing long before the arrest was sent through, and they could have rejected it at the time it came through. Because when it came through, it had to go through, as I say, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Minister of Justice would have to have seen it. So it must have been discussed in cabinet. And it could not have not been discussed in cabinet. Huawei is a major technological company in the world and supplies much equipment here. And she is a very important official of that company. And they knew that the ramifications and consequences for her arrest would be enormous. So that had to have been discussed in cabinet. And all the cabinet officials could have agreed with Trudeau to reject the request. So obviously they willingly agreed to follow through with the American request, or there was heavy pressure put on them, which they're not revealing to us, which forced them to. But if they wanted us to be aware and be transparent, they should be either, if they willingly did it, they should tell us why they willingly did it. And if they were forced to do it, what pressure, they should tell the Canadian people what pressure was exerted upon them to do so.
Yeah, very good question. I have another question. What about when Meng is released? I think there's a lot of people are, we're hoping obviously she's going to get released. Is there a situation where she could sue the Canadian government, for this 2.5 years of her life that she's basically been under house arrest? Is there a process for that?
Yeah, she could. In fact, I understand that Huawei itself has sued Canada in the BC courts some months ago. I'm not sure where that civil suit stands right now. I'm not involved in that.
Right.
I haven't followed it too much, but I know where they did file a claim for damages for that.
Okay.
But she could also personally sue for illegal detention, unlawful detention, arbitrary detention.
If she were to sue, would it just be Canada, or could it also be, would it be U.S. and Canada, U.S., Canada?
Well, her rights were violated in Canada, so she could sue for a violation of various rights and her treatment here and so on.
Okay.
Arguably, Huawei and she could also file a suit in the United States because Huawei has offices in the United States.
Correct.
That's a complicated discussion of conflict and laws, and we'd take a long time to get around that.
For sure. Yeah, I think just a couple of people had asked, if there is, obviously I think a lot of us are just saying, wow, this has, been a long time for her to be here. And I mean, it's obviously costing her a lot of money and security and, a lot of fees for her to, to go through this entire process. Yeah. So, yeah, I think we're really interested to know that. Trudeau could have done more. It certainly went. I'm going to touch on that a little bit later when I come on talking about actually the extradition request, how that was handled into the Trudeau office. That was quite an interesting thing. That's excellent. Chris, I really appreciate you, coming on board. What are you anticipating for August? I mean, with this, there's, going to be some new evidence that has been, admitted. I think this was a really big, update to the case. Is that very surprisingly, I know a lot of the local reporters here in Vancouver, they did not actually think that the judge or Chief Justice Holmes, would actually extend this. And then very surprisingly, she said, yeah, we're going to accept this new evidence in. We're going to go ahead and give some time for Meng's legal team to go ahead and go through this evidence. And, we're going to resume in August. So it's quite a big delay. What is your feelings on that?
It's hard to read judges like that. I mean, you can hope that because of her delay that she's being accommodating, therefore she might be in favor of Meng's position and let her go.
Right.
It can also be argued, as trial lawyers have a lot of experience with judges trying to make themselves look fair so they can hit somebody hard with a hammer at the end.
Yeah.
And they can say, well, I did everything I could in a fair manner. So it's hard to read what Justice Holmes is thinking or how she's going to react at the end of the case. I hope that she follows the law and applies it correctly and releases Miss Meng.
This is a common question. I think all of us are. I mean, how much longer can this drag out? How long we know extradition cases typically, they're very political. There's so much involved, usually requires years. I mean, do you think we're going to be able to get a decision sometime in 2021?
No. Most extradition cases are quite simple, really. A few weeks or a few days of hearing, and common criminals, they're quite, but in political cases, yeah, this case is going to be very different.
Right.
I would expect that if a decision came out near the end of the year, if it was against Meng, then there would be an appeal process, review process. Right. And even then, if that fails, there is still the right of her to approach the Minister of Justice and the government and ask for a different outcome, as I did in the case of Bobsy Hansen, who was sent back to North Carolina to face the. We saved him from the gas chamber, but
right.
That took several months to work through when. After the court decision was made. So I would say that she might still be in detention for another year or so. Okay. At least.
Okay. Well, I think we're all hoping, maybe a little bit sooner, but we do know that this is why we're having events like this. I think really to help raise awareness, because this is something that, we really feel all Canadians need to better understand. I think you really laid out, some very, key factors really in the legality of this case and, why this is so important, because as you had mentioned, this is really setting precedents for all Canadians doing business and people flying into our country. I mean, we live in very much in a global economy, an international world where we have many multinationals flying in all over the world. I mean, this is, in Canada, obviously we're known for having a great legal system. So when you have somebody come in and their rights are violated, and, you go through this process, it's a worrying thing for all of us, and we want to make sure that our legal system, keeps up to its good reputation. I think we had a couple more questions here. Let me just look here. There's a question. Does the U.S. have the right to retain or arrest a non-U.S. citizen? If the U.S. has this kind of right, then other nations could do the same to U.S. citizens in any place of the world.
No, they don't. The only no country, the United States for itself, only has jurisdiction to arrest people who committed a crime inside the United States in its territory, or under the treason laws and things like that. They can arrest an American who may have done something by giving information to somebody outside the United States. But normally, the crime has to be within the American territory, and it can be a foreigner or an American, but it has to be within that jurisdiction.
Right.
Same in every other country.
Correct.
The continuous attempt by the United States to say that world citizens of every other country are subject to their laws is both a bogus claim, wrong in international law, wrong in every other type of law, the common law and the Roman law system.
Right.
It's just the statement of a tyrannical power. It's not. It's false. It's fabricated. It doesn't exist. So no, the answer to that is they could not legally anyway.
Fair enough. I had another question come in that had asked, I think we all know the answer to this. Someone asked if Meng is convicted and is sent, has been found guilty and needs to be extradited. I think you had mentioned that earlier. I'm sure Meng's, her entire, lawyers would certainly appeal that. Someone asked if they would appeal. I'm pretty sure that would be the answer for that would be yes. Here it is. Is Meng planning to appeal the decision if it is approved for extradition? I would assume that's an easy answer, correct? Certainly.
Yeah, that would be normal to appeal, because if she's sent to the United States, and she wouldn't be convicted here if the judge finds against her in this hearing. It's not a conviction.
Right.
All it is an agreement, an order to send her back to the United States for trial, where she's presumed in their law to be innocent. So, but from what we've seen happen to Russians and other people, and the Venezuelan and the Korean man and so on and so forth, what we saw happen to Leonard Peltier in the past, once she's sent back there, she's going to be there for a long time, going through the court process. Right. And if she's convicted, she'll be there for a long time. Right. So you don't want her to go back there. We don't want her to go back there. It's a road absolutely nobody wants to travel. Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's why we're all advocating for her release. And, obviously a big part of this is just improving the relationship between, Canada and China, and making sure that we can get back to having a good relationship. Chris, I've got a question for you. I think we're going to address this in the panel. What is your feeling with the two Michaels? I think that's an important thing that we need to bring up, from your perspective. A lot of people do want to, talk about that. Can you share some of your insights there? Well, it's hard to know what to say about the two Michaels, because the Canadian government is very quiet on what they were doing in China. Mm-hmm. And I must assume that because the consular officials have meetings with them in China, that they've been told by the two Michaels what the charges are, the specifics of the charges against them are. But they're not revealing that to us. And the Chinese don't, because it's state security law. As in Canada, in treason trials, the actual evidence is not shown to the public. There was a recent naval officer in Halifax who was charged with supplying information to the Russians. So that's common in both systems. So we don't know what the actual basis of the charges are. And the Chinese claim that their arrest has nothing to do with Meng's arrest, that they would have been arrested in any event. One can connect them in time and draw a conclusion. But that's what their position is. Canada says that, of course, there was a retaliation for Meng. Right. All right. But it's quite clear that if Meng is not released, I don't think China's going to be too ready to release the two Michaels. If they were, I mean, supposing the Chinese allegations were correct and they were spying in some sort of way, normally there's an exchange of spies between countries and people are returned. Right. But if Canada keeps with this position, that process may not take place. So we do not know what's going to happen with them. I think it's a wrong assumption to conclude that you can only support Meng's case in order to achieve the release of the two Michaels. Meng's case stands by itself. She was arrested illegally without any basis for the charges under illegal laws imposed by the Americans against the world. Those laws do not exist. It's a different case. What the treason charge, the spy charge the Chinese have exist, I don't know what the facts are, whether they're guilty or not. We can't say. Correct. So we don't know what's going to happen there.
Yeah, and I think what we need to also look at is, if I mean, obviously we're all concerned about the two Michaels, and we would obviously like to see them released as well. But what are we doing in Canada to have Meng released and to improve these relations? So I think we need to see a little bit more initiative from the Canadian government and from from our side as well to get that dialogue going for the two Michaels as well. But you brought up a lot of good points there in regarding to that. Is for example, the similar laws that exist in both China and Canada as regarding to spying and things like that. So these are important facts that we need to establish, and I think all of us, again, this is the main goal for this event, is to create awareness, for all of us to be aware and to help spread the word out. I saw a lot of comments in there as well. People saying, what can I do? I'm here in Edmonton. I'm a normal Canadian citizen. What can I do to get Miss Meng Wanzhou freed? Well, it starts with just attending events like this, and educating yourself. Chris, I want to thank you for coming on and sharing your insights, because, I learned a lot. You have a great legal knowledge, and it is, quite complicated. So there's a lot of things that we need to really establish here, but you laid it out very simple. I think all of us can see, there's a lot of, misconduct that has happened. And this is a concern for Canadians, and, certainly, we need to do our part to help rectify this. And so, again, I think it's, educating yourself. I think that's a big thing that you can do, and attending panels like this, reaching out to people like, Chris Black, who's an accomplished lawyer, that can bring in these insights and learn from here. So thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for the questions. We're going to stick tight to the timeline because we've got 3 more panelists to speak. I want to make sure everybody. So Chris, thank you so much for coming on today.
You're welcome. It's a great honor to be here, and thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Well, next we're going to bring in Sheila Xiao. And again, I mentioned in the beginning intro here, for those of you that have joined, we've just crossed about 670 people live now. So we're continuing to grow. I want to thank all of you for joining here on the live stream. If you've just joined the live stream, go ahead and hit that like button. That does help the stream perform a little better in the Google algorithm. And for those of you that didn't see the intro, Sheila, you first reached out to me about a year ago. I think when you were getting your organization going. And, I think, we're very much aligned. We're both American. We both have a passion of, I guess, just uniting countries and really coming together as one people, and, really fostering better relationships. And I remember, your first campaigns, I was, actively retweeting and watching the seminars and stuff. So it's pretty cool to have you on my YouTube channel in this live stream. So welcome.
Thank you. It was kind of full circle that I'm here now, getting to be a part of this panel with you and with such amazing experts as well. Super excited to be a part of this panel. So thank you for having me on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, I really appreciated Chris's talk, just because there's so much to dig through in terms of Meng Wanzhou's arrest. But what's clear is the illegalities of her arrest, right? And I think as we talk about this, it's important for us to understand the geopolitical context of this entire situation, which has greater implications for the world stage. So as I sit here in Los Angeles and in the United States, I hope to bring that perspective to the table. Fantastic.
Sheila, thank you so much. I'm going to give you the stage, and we're going to enjoy your presentation. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So, it is evident based on the previous talk that Meng Wanzhou's arrest and kidnapping is not just about one CFO of a major corporation, nor some bogus allegations about fraud. It is yet another despicable move in the ever-growing policies of aggression on China by the United States and its partners in the Five Eyes Alliance. And as these proceedings unfold, it becomes evident the political motivations, as established before, of Meng's arrest, right? Turning this legal case into a political theater of the absurd. And Meng, a Chinese woman, having lost all of her liberties for over 2 years now, I think 3 years, has been caught in the crossfire of rising US-China tensions. And it is time that she be freed from these baseless allegations and be allowed to return home. That is the demand. And that is why we are having this webinar. And just to recap, Meng's arrest in 2018 happened during the thick of the US-China trade war. And Trump weaponized reactionary, hyper-nationalist tactics to place blame on China for the economic perils facing the United States here. But the truth is, the greater threat felt by the US is China and Chinese corporations, their ability to outcompete the US in the world free market. And what happened? China was punished by the US for this because China beat the US at its own game. So the demonizing of Huawei and the bogus arrests of Meng Wanzhou is meant to cripple Huawei and Huawei's ability to compete with US corporations. And Huawei, facing pressure from the US, is now forced to reinvent itself to overcome the banning of its technology. Many major companies and countries rely on Huawei technology, which provides the best and most economic way to bring technology to the world stage, to the world community. Countries that are now dismantling their 5G installations are facing major economic consequences and barriers to technological development. But who pays the price for this, right? Not the ruling elites of these countries, not government officials, but everyday working citizens, right? Meng Wanzhou's illegal kidnapping is really the tip of the iceberg in a monumental effort by the US to contain China's growth and re-impoverish its citizens. So Meng is caught in the US's struggle for world dominance, and Canada is playing fodder to such a ploy. And as for Huawei, the real target, it is only a matter of time that Huawei will bounce back and the US and its plan of isolation will fail. And the ill effect of the ban on Huawei is already seen here in the US. The denial of semiconductor chips to Huawei ended in a huge shortage of chips to the American auto industries, resulting in a mass canceling of auto productions, a major economy in the US. But the Meng Wanzhou saga will continue to inflict moral wounds on America's self-righteousness and lessen Biden's ability to convince our allies that they should follow him on the human rights trail. The anti-China propaganda in the US is now so profound that the Biden administration, in an effort to convince Republicans to support his far-reaching economic reforms for working class and poor people in the US, has framed their adoption by the US Congress as necessary to beat China. He even argues that the Republicans need to pass legislation providing childcare as a necessary part of the global competition with China. This is, crazy. I'm not kidding about this. And this was exactly the language Biden used when speaking before both houses of Congress about why the US needed to adopt economic and social reforms, all in the name of competing with China, instead of the fact that US citizens just deserve this. And obviously, Biden is making the case that even on the domestic front, when it comes to taking care of the needs of the working people, the US appears to be failing in the same year that China seems to be succeeding in stopping the COVID spread in its country. And not to mention that the Chinese economy bounced back strongly. In the US, on the other hand, more than 500,000 Americans died from COVID, many of which could have been prevented. 61 million of us lost our jobs, 100,000 small businesses went bankrupt, and vast parts of the US population lost their entire savings. Yet, in the words of Biden at his first speech at the joint session of Congress, he says, quote, "We're in a competition with China and other countries to win the 21st century," end quote. But what are we competing for? Why are we shoring up the entire country's powers and resources, as well as Canada's, to keep Meng Wanzhou in captivity? All in an attempt to destroy a thriving Chinese technology corporation that has beat US corporations at their own game. Biden's whopping $715 billion Pentagon budget is a larger military budget than all top 10 countries, including China, combined. Surely these funds are used to mount this continued campaign against China. And even a tiny sliver of this budget could just go a long way to ensure that the proposed reforms get passed. And in my mind, if we actually wanted to compete for the 21st century, wouldn't that mean a world without war? Wouldn't that mean a world of peaceful coexistence? A world where taking hostages and kidnapping is frowned upon and denounced as inhumane? where the exorbitant amount of funds the US spends on war would instead be used to address the many ills of society. So the double standard in Meng Wanzhou's case and her arrest calls into question, on what basis does the United States have for being the champion of human rights? You know, one only needs to look at the record of US meddling in other countries' affairs around the world, or the jailing of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, or whistleblower Chelsea Manning, and countless of many others to know that the US has really no moral ground to speak on human rights violations. And Meng Wanzhou is a clear example of that. Yet, the US has concocted a fantastical narrative about alleged human rights violations at the hands of the Chinese government, such that there is no room to debate otherwise. We've seen this play out in the discussions about Hong Kong, about Tibet, about Xinjiang. And by beating the drum of human rights without credible evidence, this leaves really no room for a rational, fair, or balanced way to discuss the facts, nor allow the public to fully understand these issues. But the politicians from both parties, with the help of mainstream media, continue to devise a narrative that casts China as the evil country that is violating human rights. And the US government is lining up all of its allies to kind of march this beat. These are all precursors to war. You know, I've seen this in my lifetime. I think many of us have. We've seen this method used before. It is a tried and true method, and we must urge our friends, our families, and colleagues, peers, to take this information in with a critical eye, because without it, we may repeat the same mistakes of allowing the catastrophic war on terror to happen, right? A war that sucked all of our resources, enlisted and endangered our citizens, only to destroy entire societies and kill innocent civilians of these countries, all for securing oil for the rich. So the consequences of major power conflict affect not only the people in China, but everyone around the world. The all-out bashing of China has unleashed an uncontainable phenomenon of racist violence against Asians in North America. And as Cyrus mentioned in the beginning, right, Vancouver was recently named the city with the highest reported counts of hate crimes against Asians. And this is something that Pivot to Peace, my organization, is actively fighting here in the US. And that's why it is critical that we address the issue of Meng's arrest, not as an isolated event, but a strategic move in the greater geopolitical context. It is also important to remember that Meng Wanzhou is a person, is a human being, is a woman who is living in isolation from her own country with her ankle monitor facing charges that could possibly land her a long-term prison sentence to be served in a US federal penitentiary. She is a political prisoner, subject of human rights violations by two big superpowers, the US and Canada, who sees her merely as a pawn in a chess game. And they're no different from bullies on the school ground, quite frankly. It is critical that we mobilize the voices that say no to war and build a mass movement that brings this issue of no new Cold War to the forefront. And more importantly, we need to sustain a movement that also demands that Meng Wanzhou be freed. It is a great honor to be a part of this panel discussion. I am happy to answer any questions. Thank you so much.
All right, fantastic. Sheila, thank you so much. Let's bring Sheila back on the screen here. Here we go. Sheila, thanks so much for your fantastic overview there. And I think you really hit on some really good points there. And I think one of the things that we always hear about with China is human rights. That is a common thing that we always hear people talking about. What about China's human rights record? And I think what's difficult in this in relation is I think we look at it from the Chinese perspective. I think that China's actually done a lot of great things especially in the last 30 years to improve human rights. I mean, I think when you look at 750 million people lifted from poverty into the middle class, providing better infrastructure, better lives, better jobs, better future. These are all parts of human rights. In addition, I think you brought up some good points about the United States. I mean, we know that, the United States, we don't have a great track record of human rights in our country. We can look at the Middle East. We can look at our history there over the last 20 years. Even going back to the Vietnam War, the Korean War. I mean, there's been a tremendous amount of human rights violations. Even unfortunately, the conflict right now happening between Israel and Palestine, very difficult to see. Very difficult to see. Tell us a little bit about more your organization, Pivot to Peace, and the work that you're specifically doing.
Yeah, Pivot to Peace, we formed almost exactly a year ago, when basically around the time that I emailed you, Cyrus, to try to shore up endorsers to be a part of and support this movement. But, we are a group of concerned Americans who are watching our government chase down China and, take our resources and basically encircling China as a precursor to war, right? And how is that affecting us as Americans? And for me, and many of us in Pivot to Peace, Chinese Americans, right? Even before COVID, a group of us got together and recognized the fact that anti-Chinese racism was on the rise. We see Chinese researchers, Chinese students get arrested for so-called espionage, right? So we felt that it was really important to create this organization where we bring light this issue of this new Cold War that's shoring up all of our resources and marching us towards yet another catastrophic, potential confrontation against a major country that we have no business targeting. And so, yeah, I mean, we started this organization, and I do feel that the unique thing about Pivot to Peace is that we are truly from the grassroots. Many of us started out in the anti-war movement in the Iraq War. And then there's also a wing of us that are established in the Chinese American community. So I really see us as the bridging of these two communities from the grassroots level to push forward this narrative that we are united against this new Cold War. So that's what we're up to now.
Fantastic, fantastic. And I do think that is, what we've looked at over the last 18 months is we've seen China victimized in so many different ways, where everything, look at the U.S. government, TikTok is a tool. WeChat, we need to ban Chinese students. And I was reading that, in the last few years, I think 10% of United States patents, come from, inventors with Chinese surnames. So essentially, the United States, a big part of the reason that we're successful is that we've had, some of the best and brightest minds from China come and contribute to our society. One of my favorite stories is Eric Yuan, who is the CEO of Zoom. All of us very familiar with Zoom now, of course, because of COVID. I mean, he applied, I think, 7 or 8 times to get the visa to come to America, was rejected, eventually came to America, studied here, went on to found Zoom Communications. He's a billionaire now. I mean, he's a very successful CEO, and he came from China, and that was an interesting thing when you look at China. They've been sending their brightest minds. Only the brightest minds in China were able to go outside of the country to study abroad. If you were from China in the 80s and 90s and you went abroad, you probably didn't return back to China. You would have immigrated to America. You would have become an American citizen like Eric Yuan. You would have had your 3 children born in America. You are contributing so much. And I think that is what's really being lost here, is that we are a melting pot, as of all these different cultures. That's what makes us American. Is so great. This is a Canadian event, but you and I are both Americans, so that's a beautiful thing. My wife is Chinese. We have 3 mixed racial children. I think it's an absolutely beautiful thing. I'm passionate about America, Canada, just being these countries that embrace diversity, and I think that's something that really needs to be said. I want to also take a moment here because, as you guys are seeing, there's a lot of super stickers and super chats being sent in. Now, I'm going to be very upfront with this. As a content creator here on YouTube, we run ads, we receive money off of these things. Any of the super chats that are been donated, I'm going to be taking all these funds and donating them back to the organizations, like Sheila's organization today and everything else. So if you're interested in giving through YouTube, any of the super chats from today, I think we've already raised, a little bit of money here already. And I really want to just say thank you all for your generous support. It's amazing. We're going to be taking all of these funds that are raised today, and we're going to be giving them back to the organizations because this is why we take time out of our day to put on these live streams. it's because we genuinely care about these issues. And I think this is something that we really need to see, because, if you've watched this channel and you've watched my stream before, there's a key phrase that I always say, and that is, when the United States and Canada, Western countries, when we can learn to work with China, the entire world's going to win. And that is really the foundation, I think, of, my YouTube channel, but also I think all of our work here together, is we're really advocating for that. And this is something that we're all passionate. And that's why I think, we have, panelists that come on here. We're all, this is what we're dedicated to. We really want to do that. So I want to just take a moment and thank everybody for your generous donations so far. And also, I also want to say we're getting close to 750 people now here on the live stream, which is fantastic. So great to see. Anybody else in there? Anybody? Let me just look through some of the comments here, just to see if we have any more comments. If anybody has any, I think Sheila, a lot of people. It was just a lot of great. Like you were a fantastic speaker. You really gave a great presentation. That's mainly the things that I was able to see. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
I mean,
anything else you want to say, Sheila? Yeah, please.
Yeah, I mean,
absolutely.
I really appreciate the kind of headline or the tagline of your YouTube channel, because when we were in the thick of COVID, and it feels like in the US, it feels like we're starting to overcome it, but I know that's not the truth for a lot of global South nations and a lot of developing nations. So I want to be conscious of that. But when we were in the thick of this and we were just watching China defeat COVID, that really speaks to the sentiment of like, what could we have accomplished if our countries all worked together? If we collaborated
Absolutely.
Instead of competing, right? Instead of watching the US government and mainstream media continuously bash and demonize China for something that China handled quite well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just wanted to make that point that collaboration, cooperation is what we need, not war and confrontation.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think when you look at other important issues, Sheila, is, for example, climate change. Like we know that this is an issue. It needs to be solved. There's no way that you could possibly solve this issue in the world unless you have the number one and number two polluters in the world, US and China, coming together and working in this strategic way. When that happens, we can solve climate change. I think if China and the US, if we put all of our money, our resources, our scientists, our brilliant minds from both countries together, I'm pretty sure we could cure cancer in the next 10 years. I mean, if we really brought them together. And I think it's just very sad when you've seen, pretty much everything is, become, just demonized and everything. I mean, I saw the other day, for example, China is celebrating, its Navy is celebrating anniversary, and they came out with, I think, a 72-year anniversary, video of China's Navy fleet. And, everyone was like, look at this propaganda from China. This is terrible. How can they be promoting this? And I'm like, I'm from America. Like all we do is have commercials about our military and how great we are. Like that is like the fundamental thing about, being American is like, remember the patriots, remember your servicemen, remember, they fought for your freedom. I don't think there's really anything, propaganda about it. I mean, unless we want to call both sides propaganda. But I think it's just, like there's a lot of reasons why Chinese people are very proud of their country. I mean, I think, I know a tremendous amount of expats and Chinese in China right now. They're so happy with the way their government, handled COVID-19. Here in Vancouver, we had Chinese citizens that were, permanent residents here in Vancouver that were purchasing, private jets. I mean, purchasing a ticket on a private jet to get back to China and saying, I don't feel confident in, Western society that they can handle COVID. I want to go back to China. Like they have it under control. And, it's just interesting to see the two countries and how they, handled COVID. And I think, there's some frustration there, right? I mean, almost like, that's not fair. Why is China already, they were the first ones in. Why are they the first ones out? But we also have to look at, what did they do? They did something very different than us. And so, that shouldn't be really a jealousy, but maybe an opportunity to learn from. I think you look at seeing, you look at China and how they have sent these vaccines, the personal protection equipment. I mean, they were donating so much all over the world, and especially to these serviced areas, throughout Africa and, many nations around the world. So I think there's, a great opportunity, to cooperate. So and then everybody, I'm struggling to keep up with all of the donations. So I want to again thank everybody for coming in. We're going to donate all these back. So anything that you want to donate, it's going back to all these organizations, that are really fighting for a better world. And I think that's as simple as it goes. I mean, I'm a father of 3 young children. This is why I YouTube. I want to be a change that you want to see in the world, and that we can create something that's better for the society moving forward. So Sheila, any other comments you want to say?
Just that I really appreciate you hosting this. We have to continue to have these types of conversations. And most importantly, thank you so much for donating these funds back into organizations, grassroots organizations that are doing a lot of hard work. It's not easy being the lone person that's advocating for peace between US and China. But when there's a community of us, it really feels so much stronger. And I can feel that our movement, even across North America, is growing. So thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sheila. We're going to segue now into the next section, and we're going to get into our next panelist, which is Mei. And Mei is quite amazing because she's based over in Quebec, and she has organized some quite amazing protests, or movements, I should say, basically advocating for, more peace in the community, and certainly speaking out against, anti-Asian hate crime. This is an element that we really wanted to bring into the live stream today. I think this is really, really important. And so I'm really excited to welcome in Mei. She's going to bring us a little bit of history here. So we're going to add her in here, and she has a PowerPoint slide that she's going to do. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this up and go ahead and share this stream. And so there we go. So Mei, the stage is yours. And and that's not actually the that's not the first slide, is it? Here we go.
Yep.
So here's the first slide. I think we're good to go. So Mei, I'm going to be controlling the slides for you, and the stage is yours. Just say next slide, and I'll be happy to push that.
Okay, thank you so much. Can you hear me clearly?
We can hear you good.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, I'd just like to acknowledge the fact that I am speaking from the island of Montreal, which in the language of the Gananahaga is called Jojage. This island had been under the guardianship of the Gananahaga people, and it has always been used as a meeting place for many, many indigenous people. So I'm grateful for that, for the guardianship of this land. And also, since colonization is still a very real, current, ongoing process, I would encourage everybody, all your listeners, to find ways to continue to actively fight against the ongoing colonialism and colonization, wherever we may be situated. Secondly, I also noticed that, as you said repeatedly, Cyrus, this event is being hosted by a number of peace groups. And so I would like to just take 20 seconds to acknowledge the fact that, or to express my solidarity with the Palestinian people who are suffering from violent Israeli occupation as we speak, by a country that is aided by the same Western imperialist powers that we're speaking about tonight. I believe that there will be no peace until Palestine is free. So thank you for giving me this time to talk a little bit about history and current events. And what I'd like to talk about is, I would like to start by explaining the roots of xenophobia, because even though my slide is going to cover like 500, 200 years, we're going to see that unfortunately history hasn't changed very much. And what was happening 150 years ago, 200 years ago, the events are still happening now. So if you can go to slide 2, Cyrus. I really like these images because it's kind of like, it symbolizes the oppressed peoples who are victims of imperialism, being able to take back our history and find some kind of social justice in our current moment. So these are on the left is the statue of Jeremy Coltrane, who was an infamous slave trader. And so last summer during the Black Lives Matter movement, his statue was toppled. And then to the right, we did the same thing here in Montreal to the statue of John A. Macdonald, who was the first Prime Minister of Canada. And a little bit later on, I'm going to read you a quote, a really racist, negrophobic, xenophobic quote that he that he made, he declared in the Canadian Parliament. And so just to establish very clearly the links between imperialism, colonialism, and white supremacy, I'm going to spend a little bit more time just on this first slide, and then later on I'll go faster, because the links that I'm going to talk about now, they will be repeated, repeated historically, like I said, right up until today. So as we all know, about 500 years ago, European imperial powers began the race for territories. And they colonized lands over the world. They committed genocide in the Americas. They waged wars in the Middle East, and which they're still doing today. And they instituted the slave trade. The ideological justification for these dastardly deeds was white supremacy. And so this was the ideology that justified the theft of land and colonization all over the world. The European colonizers needed a theory of racial hierarchy that would position white people at the very top as inherently superior to the people they've colonized. And the entire structure that followed from that, and which remains intact today, is called the system of white supremacy. And we saw that, for example, reflected in the doctrine of discovery, which deemed that when you go into into another land, even if there are people living there, it's deemed to be terra nullius, which is you just banish all the people, pretend they are not equal, and assume that this land is free for the taking and grabbing. And then there was also the manifest destiny ideology, which gave the white man the burden to civilize the rest of the world. And I would argue that the arrest of Meng Wanzhou is a desperate attempt by American imperialists to maintain their hold on world domination and through these different structures. Next. This is just one example of how imperialism and white supremacy operated in China during the time of colonization. So you probably can't see it very clearly, but this was a sign at Huangpu Park in Shanghai. So it was in the part of Shanghai that was occupied by the British imperialists. And so the fourth rule, which said, so this park was deemed off limits to Chinese citizens who lived in China and around the park. It was reserved for Europeans only, and the rule force prohibited dogs and bicycles. And so this sign was kind of characterized in a famous Bruce Lee movie to say that, even parts of China were off limits to dogs and Chinese people. So that as an expression of how inferior Chinese people were. Next. Okay. So now so this xenophobic white supremacist system also applied to Canada. So as William Deere in the last presentation, he explained very, very well the history of the Chinese Head Tax and Exclusion Act, which also occurred in the United States and in countries like New Zealand. So as soon as when the Chinese laborers finished the completion of the Canadian Railway, there were debates in Canada, in the Canadian Parliament, as to what we can do to limit the ongoing immigration of Chinese immigrants. And so this was, sorry, I've lost my notes a little bit. So this was a quote by, like I said, John A. Macdonald, who railed against the danger of mixing the Asian and African races, and that we would be, turning the white race into Mongol race. So sorry, sorry for your family, Cyrus. But this is what our a valiant prime minister really thought, and he was expressing expressing, the doctrine of white supremacy. The next table. Okay. Again, I don't know if you can read this, but I wanted to put this into my slide because, again, along with all the prejudice and criticism and China bashing, of course, many people often refer to the tradition of cultural preference for boys over girls in Chinese tradition, and there are talks about feminicide and gender preferences, but I wanted to show this slide because this is an example of where the most the most disgusting gender disparity between men and women, Chinese men and women, occurred right here in Canada, and was a product of the Chinese Head Tax and Exclusion Act. So between what this table says, if your listeners can't see clearly because of the exclusionary immigration acts, between 1906 to 1924. There were 43,470 Chinese immigrants who were admitted into the country and managed to pay the really exorbitant head taxes. But the ratio of male to 100 females was 3,570 males to 100 females. And then during the decades of what was known as the Exclusion Act, when Chinese immigration was prohibited entirely, that's why we called the Chinese population here a bachelor society, because there were almost no women here. So I think that is, it's really, really an example of Western hypocrisy when we criticize things that happen in China, whereas we've committed the same outrageous discrimination right here in Canada. Next. So now I'm going to go through a little bit of the history, the stereotypes, the myths that about Chinese people, and very xenophobic feelings and thinking about Chinese people in the Western countries, and so one of these myths is the myth of the yellow peril. So as Asians or as Chinese, of course, we're a menace, and we're a menace in so many different ways. And again, like this association of Chinese with disease, with invasion, etc., is a theme that continues to run until even today. So these are really early caricatures. On the left, just a moment, I'm looking through my notes. So on the left, you have Uncle Sam expelling the dirty Chinese from the Americas, and on the right there's a caricature of malaria, smallpox, and leprosy that's coming out of Chinatown and hovering around, menacing the entire city. Next. Then the association of Chinese people eating dirty food, this box, which is an advertisement to sell pesticide or rat poison, of course, has a man eating a rat. And again, you saw this exactly during the SARS crisis about how the fake news of Chinese people eating bats as the origin of the COVID crisis. So like I said, history repeats itself. This is a picture of, that's fine, of Caligo workers. And this is much more recent. So this is a human rights case that happened in Quebec. And in 2006, there was a group of Chinese workers who worked at a company called Caligo International. And one day, the supervisor got together all the Chinese and only Chinese workers in a room to meet the president. And the president told them, "This is Canada, not China. We take shower and shampoo every day, wash hands with soap, flush toilet after use. Don't piss on the floor. This is my kitchen, not yours. My kitchen, I want it clean. You Chinese eat like pigs. And so the Chinese worker walked off the job en masse. They were very, very dignified by this racist treatment. They filed a complaint at the Quebec Human Rights Commission. They won that. The employer appealed, and at the Court of Appeal of Quebec, they confirmed that the workers were victims of racial discrimination and were compensated justly for the undignified treatment that they went through. I'm going to speak more faster. André Boisclair, was a leader of one of Quebec's political parties that had been in power numerous times. And in 2007, he was speaking to students at a university, and he was talking about competition. So getting back to what the other speakers, I think Sheila was talking about, the vision of Asians coming, being seen as competitors and menacing our productivity. That was topic of his speech, and as an illustration of, in order to wake the students up, he said, well, when I was in Boston, I was really surprised to see that 1/3 of the students on campus had slanted eyes. So just referring to us as our physical characteristics. And actually, to tell the truth, because I did a lot of community work, I actually did have supper with him because, I was lobbying for resources for our organizations. And when I read that he said that, I thought, oh my God, did he just always refer to all of us and looked at all of us as a bunch of slanty-eyed people? It was very hurtful. Next. Again, more fake news about the Chinese menace. So in 2019, much more recent, another opposition party in Quebec, Quebec Solidaire, referred to Chinese nationals as predators who were lurking in Quebec farmlands, waiting in the wings to gobble up agricultural land in order to feed people in China and leave Quebecers starving. And that was said despite the fact that we have very clear legislation against foreign ownership of agricultural lands. And the community here is still waiting for an apology, which I doubt that we will ever get. Next. Okay, so again, the perpetual foreigner myth. Doesn't matter how many generations you've been here, you're always a foreigner, and you're always going to be associated with communist China. So to the left is a picture of Olivia Xiao, again, a very well-known Asian politician on the national level in Canada. So depicting her as, I guess, a Maoist, whereas I don't think there was ever any association between her and Maoism at all. And of course, during the COVID crisis, Derek Sloan, who is a member of parliament for the Conservative Party, called into question Dr. Theresa Tam's loyalty to Canada because purely on the fact that she has an Asian face, but he figured that, well, because she has an Asian face, she must be a stooge of the Chinese government and cannot be loyal to Canada. Next. Okay, well, this is just another slide, during the COVID crisis that again links, not just anti-Asian racism, but also anti-China sentiment. And I just want to make a comment here that, of course, I think Sheila had referred to Trump's insistence on calling the COVID-19 virus a Chinese virus, and of course, fueling the spread of hatred towards Asians in the States, and of course, it spilled into Canada as well. But I would argue that what he was doing was merely a reflection of an entire power structure of imperialist white supremacist rule, which remains intact. Like I said, stretching from 500 years ago until today. He just broke the social contract, not to say it. But I agree with political commentators who say that the next time they'll get somebody who's much smarter and will put in the same racist, capitalist, oppressive, colonialist policies in place, and not say it. This was a really I put this in here just because I found it interesting how internalized racism can work in our own communities as Asian Canadians or Asian Americans. So actually, this was a store that's right downstairs from my office where I'm speaking now. And last year, in the middle of the COVID crisis, they put this sign on their window. It's a Taiwanese store, and it says, the Communist Party of China is responsible for the COVID-19 pandemic, and not the innocent Asians who are victims. And I just, sorry, I can't help but laugh, because the people who put this up actually believe that racists are able to distinguish between Filipinos and Malaysians and Vietnamese and Taiwanese and Chinese and indigenous peoples. I think that when you try to throw another minority under the bus, you're just shooting yourself in the foot. Next. Okay, so the COVID-19, the beginning of the pandemic, kicked off a spate of anti-Asian hate and racism all across North America. In Montreal, there were there were vandalisms of cultural and religious objects, as well as a stabbing. A Korean national man was stabbed in the neck. And he ended up going back to Korea, where I guess he felt much safer. Sorry, I'm just looking through my notes. Okay, next. Yeah, next. Okay, so I just wanted to refer to you a few highlights of a study that was done by two Asian anti-racism organizations led by CCNC, the Chinese Canadian National Council in Toronto, and Fight COVID Racism. So this was a survey after 1 year of reports of racist attacks. So they found that within this year, from March 1st last year to February 28th of this year, there was a total of 1,150 cases of anti-Asian hate crimes reported in Canada. The majority came from Ontario and BC, because those are the most populous provinces that we have in Canada. Next. Where did these attacks take place? So this is, again, is really interesting. So nearly 50% were in public places like the streets, the sidewalk, parks. 17% of the attacks occurred in businesses, 8% in public transport, 3% in parking lots. So in other words, we heard some of the reactions that we heard from Asian people during the COVID crisis was that a lot of people feared leaving their house. People spoke about being unable to look other people in the eyes, thinking that they had to hide themselves. And I think that, and it's no wonder, because most of the attacks did take place, because of all the anti-Asian hate and racism that was being fomented in the public area. People felt that emboldened and authorized to just assault others on the basis of their race. So I think that I'm just gonna, could you just go next? The types of attacks, well, yeah, most of them were verbal attacks, so go on. Because I'm just afraid I'm hogging up too much time. So after a year of accumulation of anti-Asian hate and racism and all kinds of attacks, just in March, when we thought we were, with the introduction of the vaccines, we just when we thought hope was on the horizon, that's when we heard about the shootings in Atlanta, the shootings which targeted Asian sex workers. And so personally, I felt that really hard, and I thought enough is enough. This anti-Asian hate is not going to stop. Even when the COVID crisis is over, we see historically how things flare up, but it's always there. It's always underlying. And so I decided that, inspired by the Black Lives movement and marches for the rights of Indigenous peoples, I did a call out for a demonstration, and it was it was like beyond our expectation. We're expecting like 200-300 people to show up according to our Facebook page, and in the end, between the 2,000 to 4,000 people all came out into the streets to march against anti-Asian hate, and it was really great because we had so many allies as well, people from Black Lives Matter, independent Jewish Voices for Peace, et cetera. And so it just shows how important it is to be in solidarity with other oppressed minorities. I'm going to end by saying that, so right now there are a lot of national initiatives and national coalitions to fight against anti-Asian hate. I just want to make a comment that some of these national coalitions are funded by the Canadian government. And I just want to say that I find it really ironic. I think it's really hypocritical that the Canadian government, on the one hand, will purport to fight anti-Asian racism, but then on the other hand, perpetuate xenophobia by assisting the Americans in the provocation of a Cold War with China through the arrest and detention of Meng Wanzhou. And so I'm just going to end by saying, just like the racialized people at the beginning of my presentation who toppled the statues of slave traders and colonizers, I think it's time for us to tear down the structures of racial capitalism and imperialism. Sorry, I spoke too long.
Nay, thank you so much. That was fantastic. I think a lot of people really enjoyed your presentation because there is a lot of history, when we look back, and I think it's really important that we study history, and that's something that people really need to understand. If you don't know the history, you're only bound to repeat it, and I think this is really important that you brought that element in, to discuss. I do want to, I had one really great question here, and I think you're the best person to answer this. It says, May, excellent presentation. In the specific conditions of Quebec, how would you organize a peace movement to fight xenophobia and against the Cold War in Quebec? And I believe you've already done this, so I think this is an easy one for you to answer.
Yeah, you know what? Quebec is interesting, because things can happen at any extreme. I remember during the first Iraq War, the biggest demonstrations against imperialist war was in Quebec. And I remember reading hey, wow, we outnumber New York, Los Angeles, etc. But right now we're in we're governed by a really repressive white supremacist government. But I think again, the way, and sometimes when the conditions are more repressive, that's where a crisis will force people, allies, to get into coalition building much faster. And so we've been doing this, with our demonstrations, etc. We've been building coalitions on the grassroots level, just like Sheila has been doing.
Yeah. Absolutely. Fantastic. Yeah, I think you brought up a lot of good points there. And I think this is something that, I've highlighted on my YouTube channel as well, where, I think it's really tough to just put the blame specifically on China and say, China caused this virus. This is a virus. We live in a world with 7 billion people. There's tremendous amount of, travel, diseases, everything that's happening around the world. It's quite interesting. I made a YouTube video about this that was specifically called, are you still blaming China for COVID-19? And it went through various media reports, from many, international organizations talking about how COVID-19 samples were found in Spanish sewer samples, from March 2020. There was a very mysterious virus that was going through this nursing home, in let's see, So I think it was actually the summer before, so it would have been 2019, July 2019, a very mysterious virus that had gone through. And if you watch the news clip, it's about a 1.5 minute long news clip, and everything the reporter's talking about, it sounds exactly like it's COVID-19. There's many different things. I mean, we saw it, spreading through Italy, through the UK. All of these reports were coming in the fall of 2019, well before anybody in the international community really knew, had even heard of Wuhan before, but people are very, we're always looking for someone to blame. And I think that this is really also a really interesting thing, that I had mentioned as well, is the fact that you look at how fast China goes. As soon as this problem happened, they shut down Wuhan, they build, 2 amazing hospitals in the span of 10 days. On the flip side, at the same time, the United States is trying to impeach Donald Trump. We know that he will not be impeached. They actually spent 20 days on a trial trying to impeach the president, which we know will basically, not go through because the Republicans control the House. And so they're going to veto that. You obviously need, a decision from both the House and the Senate in order to take down the president like that, to impeach him. So it's just a very big contrast to see the difference between the two and how they handled that. And I mentioned that earlier in the stream. I think there was a little bit of jealousy in there, that people almost felt, it's not fair that China gets to, they were the only major country in the world to have a growing economy last year. It's not fair that many people aren't wearing face masks and that they're traveling domestically and that life has pretty much been normal for 8-9 months now. But this is the reality of our situation. And the thing is I think the other thing that's really interesting that I want to share is I live here in Vancouver. I'm specifically in Richmond, and it was interesting because I was talking to a lot of people here, and in the beginning they were like, I'm really scared with this virus because we have so many Chinese people here. I think Richmond, which is about 70% Chinese, I think Richmond will be the worst area. And we actually saw the opposite. We actually saw, because the Chinese people, they know to social distance, they know to wear face masks. Richmond, out of all the areas in Greater Vancouver area, actually had the lowest amount of COVID cases, still to this day right now. And so you actually saw an opposite, and it was quite interesting because I was talking with some other neighbors that are Caucasian, and they just said, I'm really glad that we live in Richmond. I mean, it's nice that the Chinese really, kind of protected us and helped us. And that was really nice to hear, so I thought that was good. And so, yeah, I think it's, again, this is why we wanted to bring you in, to talk about the history. I think that's really important. May, thank you so much for your time, with us today. Fantastic. Now, everybody, I'm going to, we're running a little bit behind schedule. I'm next to speak, and I'm just basically going to wrap this up in the next 10 minutes or so, and then we're going to bring in, a closing, our sponsor to close this out here. But, this is something that, I've really enjoyed hosting this event today, because I believe that when we look at all of these events, it's amazing how much our world has shifted over the past, 18 to 24 months, and how, I first went to China in 2007, and it was amazing because at that time, the United States, Canada, China, they were growing so fast together. There was many Canadian and American companies going into China, doing business. There was a great relationship, between these two. And, from 2007 to 2013, the years that I was living in Shanghai, this was a really booming time for China's economy. I mean, it was really booming, and it was really because of fostering these relationships with other countries around the world. I say this all the time when people say, Cyrus, we should boycott everything made in China. Well, the very American or the Western way of life that we come to enjoy, the equipment that we're using to live stream here. I mean, you look at Huawei, for example, and we're going to tie this back into Meng Wanzhou. You look at Huawei, they have some amazing technology, the technology that's literally changing, the world. And there's an important thing that I wanted to bring up. There was a letter written from Mark Warner and Marco Rubio, 2 United States senators, and it was actually sent to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau about 6 weeks before Meng's arrest. And in this letter, it basically said, Prime Minister Trudeau, Huawei is a Chinese company. We know that essentially there's no Chinese company that is not independent of the Chinese government. You need to ban Huawei in Canada, and you need to make sure that, you're supporting American, companies. And, we need to work together to build our own 5G network, because we can't trust, Huawei. The interesting thing is that Huawei has done a tremendous amount for the country of Canada. You know, they have moved a research and development center from Silicon Valley to Markham, Ontario. There's 400 people that work in that R&D center. There's over 1,300 jobs that, here, working for Huawei, in Canada. These are, really high-level jobs, engineers, people that are working on this, that are contributing, Huawei is contributing to the Canadian economy. The other thing that's really interesting is Canada has had a difficult history with its First Nations, the Indigenous people in Canada. Huawei is the one that voluntarily was building some of the infrastructure and networks to improve, their communications. That was Huawei coming in here. And this is amazing what we see when you actually study Huawei and you see the initiatives that they're taking in Africa to really help these small, underprivileged third world countries, connect to the internet, and there's an amazing statistic about Huawei, 80% of the top 50 telecommunication companies in the world, have a relationship and a partnership with Huawei, are using their technology, are using their equipment. They have done an amazing job, with their equipment. The other thing that's interesting as well is you look at Huawei and, they're always, very complimentative towards other companies. For example, they have a great respect for Apple. Actually, they, even Meng Wanzhou, when she was arrested, she had an Apple phone, and it's not like, well, we can't support Apple. It's they make great products too. Like, we have a lot of respect for Apple. We realize that, like Coke and Pepsi, there can be multiple brands competing. Huawei last year became the #1 smartphone manufacturer in the world as far as the number of units that were distributed. They have a great success. But guess who's also doing very well in China? Apple. They sold a tremendous amount of units. So it's not about trying to take down one. There's room for many companies to exist. And the reality is that you need competition in order to make yourself better. Even when you think of sports, Michael Jordan, why was he so good? Because he competed against amazing other athletes that pushed him to become better. And this is what I think we need to really, go back into it. There's nothing wrong with having a competitor like Huawei. They're going to push you to more innovation and to make better products. This is what's going to happen with Huawei. When the United States sanctions them, look at what they are doing right now. They are basically saying, well, we need to reinvent ourselves. This is a tough time. I'm not going to lie about it. It's a difficult time, but we are going to be able to rise up again. We're going to focus, because again, cell phones is not our bread and butter. Right? It's actually infrastructure. It's 5G technology. It's many different things. They're a huge company. They spent, $19 billion in research and development last year. There's arguments that are made, oh, Huawei, all they do is copy Apple. Not a chance. When you're spending $19 billion in R&D, you're leading the way. There's a reason why Shenzhen is the first city in the world to be wall-to-wall 5G. Why the metro system in Shenzhen is running on 5G. Why, this new digital currency that is being launched in China. This is a fantastic technology. It all has to do with 5G technology, blockchain, all of this works together. And this is why companies like this are so important. So I just want people to really understand I'm trying to tie this back in with the Huawei situation. Our world is a better world with a better relationship with China. I firmly believe that China is inventing the technology that is going to impact and change the world for the better. And this is why I believe that, I like to refer this to as a China mirage. This is one of the best books that I've ever read about United States and China. This is called The China Mirage. It's from author James Bradley. I've read this book extensively, and in fact, I'm going to be making a series of videos this summer about this book and the lessons that I've learned from this book. But essentially, when you go back, and this is why I thought May's presentation was so important, you need to go back in history and understand this. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and Delano, his grandfather, made a tremendous amount of money in the opium trade in China. Franklin Delano Roosevelt lived a very lavish lifestyle. It was all money that he inherited. He had spent his entire life in the public sector. You do not make a large salary if you are working as a governor or a president of the United States. You don't earn a large salary. United States president, $400,000 a year, roughly, is the salary. You're not making a lot of money. You're making other money from other ventures. The Delano Roosevelt family had a tremendous amount of money that they had accumulated from, drug dealing in China. And the interesting thing is that when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was president, he had no idea of what was going on in China. And he firmly believed that, he said, China is going to be the next democratic Christian nation. We're going to essentially colonize them. They will become our greatest ally, and they will learn to be exactly like us. And the interesting thing was, Chairman Mao had reached out to America, and he had said, I want to build a relationship with America. And, Delano Roosevelt said, Chairman, who? Who is this guy? He's nobody. We're not even going to pay attention to this guy. And you can see from history how they misguided and completely miscalculated what was going on with China. And, ultimately, America lost a tremendous amount of face in China because they didn't understand what was going on the ground. This is what's happening right now. Is I firmly believe that China is inventing the future of our world, and that we strongly need a partnership with China, or else we're going to be left behind. And I think this is where you see it, and this is what I do a lot on my channel, is talking about the business side of this. Talk to any expat that is on the ground in China, working with these international companies over there. It's incredible, the innovation and everything is like, if you're in digital marketing, if you are in financial technology, you have to go to China. That's where the future is right now. This is, if you want to see what we're going to be like 10 years from now, go to Shenzhen. That's what's being experimented right now. And again, the China's digital currency, fascinating stuff. And again, that is going to really impact the future of our world. China is going to be, responsible for that as the first major nation to take that on. Everybody, I've got about 5 minutes left. We're running over a little bit. I just want to say, I'm going to touch on a couple key things from the Meng Wanzhou thing. And kind of circle back to what Chris had mentioned earlier. One of the things, as he said, is, and this is very important, what I want people to understand. Meng Wanzhou, it's very unusual for the government to go after an individual. Most definitely, it is the company that is normally getting fined. For example, in 2011, JP Morgan was fined $88 million fines for violating U.S. sanctions against Cuba, Iran, and Sudan, but they didn't take the CEO. They fined the company. Now, they're not alone. Since 2010, there has been many banks, the Bank of Brazil, America, Guam, Moscow, Tokyo, Barclays, BNP Paribas, the Deutsche Bank, HSBC, Abu Dhabi, Pakistan. All of these banks have been found guilty, from the United States, sanctions, and have been fined. So this is not a rare thing. It's happened dozens and dozens of times in the last decade, but not one other case has there been where a CEO has been, or a high-level executive has been taken off the plane and arrested. And this is something that is a huge red flag. And I think the other thing is that we've made it. The Canadian government has made a mistake, as far as how they've handled this. And unfortunately, this has really been a difficult time, I think, for Canadians, because, I know that, this is a battle between the United States and China. Unfortunately, Canada is really stuck in the middle. I think all of us, we want to see this be resolved as soon as possible. So again, I want to just kind of close with that thought. And I want to thank everybody for, being here in the live stream today. I want to thank, my other three panelists who came on, to share their insights, really some amazing organizations that have come behind this live stream to sponsor this and to, really get behind this movement. Because again, it all starts with education. It all starts with knowledge. If you have knowledge of what's happening and you take the time to, to watch a webinar like this so that you stay informed, this is how we're going to make change in our government. And this is how we're going to make change for our country. And again, I'm going to end, with my famous quote that I really, embrace. And that is, and again, this is the cornerstone of this channel, is the fact that, when the United States, or in this case, when Canada, Western countries, when we learn to work with China, this is a benefit for the entire world. And that is what we're fighting for. Pivot to peace. We're not going down the road to Cold War. If you want a war with China, that is a lose-lose for not only you and China, but for everybody in the world. This is what we're fighting for. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being a part of our live stream event today. I'm going to bring in Brendan, and he is going to close us out.
Sure. Hi, I'm Brendan, and I'm from the Hamilton Coalition.
Sorry.
I'm from the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War, which is one of the sponsoring organizations, as you might have noticed when that was read out. Now, the case of Meng Wanzhou is very personal to me because it's symbolic of a rising racism in our society, where many are unfortunately mimicking Washington's white supremacist attitude that it should dictate what happens in China or how people should conduct international business. So we in Hamilton have actually spent the last 20 years fighting the racism against Muslims and Arabs that was intensified by the war on terror, as Sheila has noted, among others. And so when I see another rise in racism spurred on by war propaganda, and that's what it is, it's pre-war propaganda, I know this racism has to be challenged. Now, in the Jewish tradition, there is the Passover ceremony. And one of the 4 questions that night is, what makes this night different from all other nights? And it leads to a story about oppression and liberation. And I say this because this is Asia Pacific Heritage Month in the United States, and made me ask myself, what makes this Asian Heritage Month different from all the others? And what's different, and our panelists have touched on this, is that the accelerating discrimination and xenophobia concerning persons of Asian descent, and it's during a period of artificially induced tensions. And as you all know from the panel, a large cause of this is the new Cold War on China. And the United States is circumventing every international institution that was set up after the Second World War, just so it can raise tensions with China and fearmonger about Huawei and create a false picture about what Chinese people are doing. And unfortunately, we have to admit that conjuring demons about China leads to the demonization of all Asians in Canada, as May pointed out. And so I think we have to turn this story of oppression into one of liberation. And the defaming and kidnapping of Meng Wanzhou is only one of the more visible examples of this new Cold War. So we're very heartened by the movement that is emerging to challenge these dangerous activities by our governments. And thousands of people have joined our mailing lists to find out how they can support Meng and challenge war propaganda and have international relations based upon mutual respect and cooperation. So if you'd like to join our list, please go to hcsw.ca, go to the Contact Us section, go to one of the other sponsoring organizations, get involved. And given the updates to the Meng Wanzhou case, like the documents that her team secured from HSBC Bank, we're going to have some follow-up events. So why else do we continue our activism? Well, we have a saying here in Canada that judges read newspapers. And this means that even high officials in the justice system are influenced by public opinion. We know that Justice Holmes realizes there's a rising tide of this racism in the country, but we also want her to know there's a growing grassroots movement here that wants Meng freed and relations improved. And finally, we know that Canada's Extradition Act allows the Minister of Justice to end the extradition process against Meng at any point. So if Justice Holmes' decision later this year goes against Ms. Meng, we will hold pickets, rallies, and vigils in support of her to try to persuade the government to release her. Now, the Trudeau government is facing an election, and he's well aware of our activities and the fact that many Canadians feel he has made a colossal blunder in arresting Meng at the insistence of the former Trump government. So for these reasons, we will continue our advocacy, and we hope you can do the same. We need to be bringing in the business community. We need to bring in labor. There are whole sectors of Canadian society that can join us. So let's free Meng Wanzhou and see what can be achieved through cooperation. Thank you.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Everybody, I want to close this out here. Again, with just a thank you to all of you. You know, we've had a tremendous amount of support, a lot of comments in the stream. Again, I'm very happy to take all the donations that you guys have generously sent into the channel, to my channel personally. I'm going to take these donations and we're going to give those back, you know, to these amazing organizations that, you know, again, where all of us are fighting the same mission, and that's to make the world a better place. And, you know, and I think we'll end this on this quote, you know, because a lot of people are still asking, you know, what can I do? What can I do? And it's be the change you want to see in the world. You know, if you want to see a change in the world, go be that change. I'm really inspired by, you know, the fellow panelists that came on today, you know, Ken and Brendan Stone, you know, for your tireless effort in organizing events like this, you know, and Brendan, thank you for sharing that story as well, you know, why that means so much to you. And again, we're going to keep campaigning for this, you know, because we want to see a better world. So guys, thank you all for your amazing support, and I look forward to seeing you all in a future live stream. Thank you.